An activist has officially been charged for using the GrapheneOS duress pin feature to destroy evidence. Facial recognition is running rampant in private companies, and inside Germany's free speech crackdowns. We are covering all of this and more coming up on this episode of This Week in Privacy number 64, so stay tuned.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Privacy, our weekly series where we discuss the latest updates with what we're working on within the Privacy Guides community and this week's top stories in data privacy and cybersecurity. I'm Nate, and with me this week again is Jonah. Jonah, how was your week?
You know, it's been pretty great. Lots of stuff going on. I think lots of good stories to talk about. I was ordering some stickers that I could hand out at DEF CON when I'm there next week. Unfortunately, those haven't arrived yet. They're arriving in a few hours. I wanted to maybe show people what they would look like on the stream today, but don't have them yet. But they are pretty cool. And I sent a picture in our supporters chat. And if anyone will be at DEF CON next week again, come say hi, and I'll give you one. That's the only place to get them. We don't have them on the store.
Yeah, I showed
beyond
I showed the picture you sent in the supporter chat to my wife, and she was like, "Oh, those are so cool." So yeah,
I'll have to
look
get
awesome.
them out. Hopefully, I have some extras that I can mail out to people afterwards. But we'll see. We'll see. How have you been, Nate?
Yeah. Good. It's been a busy week, but we'll I guess we'll talk more in the site updates, but we got a lot done this week, and yeah, I mean, not too much exciting over on my end. Just yeah, all good.
Sweet. Well, those updates should be exciting. With that, let's talk about our first story today. This was reported by Ars Technica. An activist was charged with a felony after giving border agent duress code that wiped his phone. So they say in early 2025, Atlanta resident Samuel Tunick was on his way home following a trip abroad. After landing in the US, customs agents demanded access to his Google Pixel phone. You probably see where that's going. It was running an alternative version of Android called GrapheneOS. And we talked about some of this on This Week in Privacy episode number 31, the security features. Government attorneys and agents claim that Tunick was subjected to a standard secondary interrogation at an international airport. During that encounter, agents were looking for anything that's prohibited. However, Tunick's legal team alleges he was targeted for his activism. This is because Tunick was involved with a group called Defend the Atlanta Forest, which opposed the construction of an enormous law enforcement training facility in the area often known as Cop City. What Tunick didn't know, according to his lawyers, was that he'd been placed on a watch list for his actions and that Customs and Border Protection had discussed over email plans to detain him upon his arrival back in the US for suspected terrorism activities. So during this investigation, these Border Patrol agents basically said they wanted to search his phone for evidence of child sexual abuse material. We talked a bit about that sort of thing in another story last week. And if he didn't unlock the device, it would be confiscated. So what comes into this story and how it relates to GrapheneOS is the duress code is an optional feature of GrapheneOS that allows a user to set up a secondary PIN number that when it's entered, if you're worried about it falling into the wrong hands, or if you're in a situation like this, you can basically enter that code on the lock screen instead of your regular PIN number, and it immediately irreversibly wipes the eSIM, it wipes the entire device, so none of that data can be restored. The article says that Tunick provided this code to an agent who entered it on the phone, after which the screen went blank, flashed several times, and the phone appeared to restart. All of the data on the phone was gone, but authorities confiscated it anyways. Tunick was allowed to leave at that time, But in late 2025, the US Department of Justice opted to file criminal charges against him, citing a little used statute, Title 18 US Code Section 2232A, that makes it illegal to knowingly destroy or damage property to prevent it from being seized. TechCrunch noted that this appears to be a new legal strategy for the government. EFF experts who spoke to TechCrunch note that they've never seen the law applied in this way before. So the Department of Justice will need to argue that even though Tunic was told this was a routine border check, he ran afoul of the law by tricking an agent into deleting his data. If convicted, Tunic could face up to 5 years in prison. 404 Media also interviewed Tunic and his lawyer said that he only found one other case using the same law, which was a drug trafficking investigation. In other posts and outlets, I think we have an article from PC Mag here. GrapheneOS discussed the case from a technical perspective, noting that none of their features are illegal and that based on current evidence, GrapheneOS phones can withstand forensic investigation without requiring the use of a duress pin. So that is quite a story that I think will have a lot of people using GrapheneOS and maybe this duress pin feature interested. Nate, I'm really curious what you think about all of this first of all. Why don't you share your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is a complicated story in the sense that when we first covered this story back in what did we say it was there this week in Privacy 31, I reached out to a friend of mine who's a lawyer and asked their expertise. And veteran viewers know that like right now, the entire state of the Fourth Amendment as it relates to electronic devices is really, really up in the air. And the courts are kind of really shy to make a ruling and lay down some precedent either way. So right now, let's see. I asked my friend to send me that paper she wrote again. So basically, right now, searches normally require a warrant, but at the border, there's an exception, and within 100 miles from land borders and coastlines, as well as airports, international airports, and it's worth noting that about 2/3 of Americans live in this area. So they can do a routine search, which again has not been legally defined by the Supreme Court. And it just says one that does not seriously invade a traveler's privacy. And let's see, CBP guidance requires reasonable suspicion only for advanced searches. And a reasonable, a search is considered advanced if an officer connects external equipment through a wired or wireless connection to an electronic device, not merely to gain access to the device, but to review, copy, and or analyze its contents. So this, I think, would have counted as a routine search. I also spoke to, let me pull up my notes here. I spoke to a friend of mine who works in law enforcement to get his take. He's very knowledgeable. He knows about graphene. He knows that it's not something that just criminals use. He said that he checked the court records for federal cases using that section 18 to 2232A. And he said the only ones that he found involved physical property and a criminal investigation, which he notes based on the information we have right now, this was not a criminal investigation. This was a routine search. He said, I can't tell you the likelihood of this charge sticking because that's beyond the scope of my legal knowledge. But in his opinion, it's kind of a stretch. Let me see here. I'm trying to make sure I didn't miss anything with his take. Yeah, so it's very I think what this is ultimately going to come down to, and for the record, I'm not a lawyer either. I don't have any legal training. I got really busy and I forgot to send my lawyer friend the actual legal paperwork, which I think the TechCrunch article links to. Oh, this one does too, actually. So there is a link in there if you want to read the actual charges. I think it's only like 2 pages. It's not that long. But from what I'm reading and what I'm seeing from other people, trying to charge him under this specific statute is kind of weird. And it may not stick, but I think what might come back to bite him is the fact that he gave the officer the wrong pin. and he knowingly did so. Although I would like to note that the mayor of New York claimed that he forgot his phone's password and never faced any consequences, which I don't think any of us buy that. But it'd be one thing. Like I've seen some people say online, I think they've even said in our forum thread about this, that it'd be one thing if like he wrote down the duress pin in his phone and made it look like the actual pin, or if he made it something easily guessable, like, his birth year, 111100, whatever. If he had done that and the cop just guessed and assumed, I think he'd be in a much stronger legal position. If anything's going to come back to bite him, I think it's going to be the fact that he knowingly gave them a duress pin. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think I mean, all this is kind of beating around the bush of saying that, like, I think we all know this whole, like, oh, we think there's CSAM on your phone. Like, really? Why do you think that? Like, where'd that accusation come from? Like this,
Yeah,
I think what's the word I'm looking for? I think most people can see right through it that this was clearly related to his activism with the whole Stop Cop City thing, which, for the record, I do want to point out there that the last time we talked about a story about Stop Cop City and Proton turned over information to the FBI, that person was accused of like throwing firebombs and like being violently aggressive, which I advocate for peaceful protest. So I don't know what this dude's story is. I don't know if he was out there throwing Molotov cocktails or if he was just out holding signs. But either way, I think there's clearly a link here. And I think
yeah,
this is probably going to be one of those like really big cases that we have to keep our eye on and hope for the best.
for sure. I mean, and Dag Overhaul in the chat said exactly the same thing. I mean, the government used three different excuses in this Ars Technica article. Um, they said they were investigating him for terrorism. They talked about using CSAM as a pretense, which is exactly in line with what I was talking about last week, which is that the government uses these as an excuse to search random people, often without any evidence at all. And this is just yet more proof of that happening. There probably wasn't any sort of probable cause whatsoever for the things that the government was claiming was on his phone, which I think is a huge problem for their legal case. Again, I'm obviously not a lawyer either, but I totally agree with what your friend was saying too about this specific law. When I read this article, I think it was posted by Zach Whitaker on TechCrunch, who's an excellent reporter, and my immediate reaction was that this is a very strange law to charge him with, because I do think it clearly relates to physical property. The law says that you can't knowingly destroy or damage property to prevent it from being seized by the government. However, the government did seize his phone, and his phone is still fully functional as a phone. So in what way was the property destroyed in a way that prevented them from seizing it? Obviously, the government is after the data; they're not after the phone itself. But I don't think that this law applies at all to this data case. There's been a lot of court cases that we've seen actually where, unrelated to criminal charges whatsoever, but it's generally understood that data is not property in the first place. And this U.S. code specifically relates to property. I think, if data was property, there'd be a lot more arguments about, like, oh, these data brokers, they're illegally possessing my property, right? So I can I can sue them. It's basically theft if they're sharing it and selling it and whatever. But that isn't how the law works. Obviously, I'm not really sure that's how the law works. I don't really subscribe to the fact that personal data is property. I think that would open up a whole can of worms that we don't have to get into right now. But at least at the moment, that isn't how it works. And I think that because of all these things, I think these charges are pretty tenuous at best. This is obviously, to me, a case of the government just trying to use the court system as like a punitive uh, attack against him, because it's expensive to go through all of these legal proceedings. He had to get a lawyer now. There's all of these. I mean, he has to deal with this lawsuit, right? It's annoying, And even if you're completely innocent of anything you're being or everything you're being accused of, it's a whole process, and that is the goal of the government in these cases. It's an intimidation tactic, I think, against protesters or activists like Tunic here, and it is really not a great story. The government basically has unlimited money, resources, power in the courts to make your life terrible forever until you give in. So, um, yeah, it's a very scary and concerning story, and it's very problematic that this continues to be a thing at the border, especially with border control agents and US citizens. So, yeah, I think that sort of sums up what I was saying. Let me see if we had anything else in the notes here I didn't talk about. Or I'll look.
I'll add real quick while you're checking that I think you made a really good point about data as property. Like this almost feels like a double-edged sword where the government either has to say like, no, he didn't destroy property, therefore he didn't do anything wrong, or B, they have to say, okay, data is property, which I would imagine, again, not a lawyer, now the Fourth Amendment applies a little bit more rigidly, and they have to stop doing things like buying data from data brokers to get around a warrant requirement. And I feel like the government kind of put themselves in a corner here with that one when you brought that up.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole data as property thing that's been debated a lot in terms of like advantages or disadvantages it would have. But I mean, in this case, like the property itself was not destroyed, and the article literally says like, and I think they say in their documents that they seized the device. They use that word. So like, what part of the law was even violated in the first place? I don't know. It's probably a case where like this is a law that's not on the the books, and so they're grasping at straws basically.
Yeah, I don't know. I had a few thoughts, if that's all you had.
Yeah, I think the main thing I just point out again is that like as GrapheneOS said, there's probably no good reason to use this in the first place because they can't get into your phone. So I would keep that in mind if you're thinking about that feature. Anyways, what are you thinking?
No, that's actually very similar to what I was going to say. Is like I think the duress pin thing is really cool, and I think it makes sense. Like obviously we don't know what was deleted from this person's phone, and maybe there was some really sensitive stuff on there, like not in the sense of CSAM, but I mean maybe there was. Who knows? Not, but maybe there were like names of other protesters and like upcoming plans and access into Google Docs and like things that he's like, I don't want the cops to have this. And so maybe the lesser evil for him was like, I need to make damn sure the cops don't get into this. Like, even though as far as we know, they can't get into graphene, like what if that 1% chance they can, and he decided it wasn't worth it for him. So I'm glad this feature does exist, but I think that we see a lot of people in the privacy space set up tools like this. I'm just gonna say, I think sometimes we think we're Mr. Robot and we like really get into these tools. And if you want to set them up, that's fine. But like keep in mind there can be consequences for this. And when I was 20 and I didn't have a family and like, I had a dead end job at Walmart, like, okay, fine. I'll set up the duress pin. Like why not? I have nowhere to be. But if you have people that rely on you going to work to keep a roof over your head, or like you pointed out, Uncle Sam has unlimited resources. Like that was that whole issue with the Tornado Cash developer that recently went to jail. Like he said that in his interviews, is he's like, yeah, I couldn't keep litigating this case. We were already tens of thousands of dollars in debt and just digging deeper, and the government has infinite pockets thanks to our taxpayer dollars. That's a different rant, to just keep charging these people endlessly and dragging this out in court. And so it's just something to keep in mind. It's a threat modeling thing. Like, again, some people really do have data where it's like, I can't risk that 1% chance, but I think most of us are probably not in that boat, and you got to keep in mind the consequences that could rise here. So
Yeah. I'll take a look at some chats here really quick.
Yeah, definitely.
Oddbite, hello, welcome to the stream.
Hello, world.
Peace Boy John. Yeah, GrapheneOS. Yeah, I mean, it's a great tool. I think it's important to note what Dag Overhaul said again here in the chat. They can't get into GrapheneOS as far as we know. That's certainly true, but I think GrapheneOS also has a lot of features that don't involve completely destroying the data. Something like I think disabling the USB port is a pretty great feature that they have. Um,
And that comes
GrapheneOS
enabled
has
by default, for the record.
Yep, when it's locked. I mean, and you can take it even further. Like on my Pixel right now, I have it completely disabled when the phone is on, so it only charges when like the phone is powered off, basically, and that has been fine because I just charge things overnight anyways. Um, and there's stuff like that. They have features like you can disable Wi-Fi and Bluetooth after a certain amount of time, or like when the phone locks, so that they can't like connect it to a malicious Wi-Fi network or something like that. So, of course it's not like as foolproof as completely destroying the data. I'll give you that. But exactly like you were saying, I think, you don't have to do this Mr. Robot, Edward Snowden LARPing thing. um, unless you have like a really good reason to. But I think like I mean, even in this case, like even if you know you're being targeted by like because of your activism or something, it's pretty unlikely that um they're gonna use all of these resources to get into your phone, maybe secret ones. If you stole like a ton of national secrets like Edward Snowden, maybe they would take it a bit more seriously. But like even situations like this, it's probably overkill. Uh, Unredacted said one can say they entered the pin and destroyed the data themselves. And yeah, one could definitely say that. I mean, you could definitely argue like they should have known about this possibility and not just done whatever he said. But also at the same time, him saying it is like um probably like that's probably the worst thing for his case. I still think that this case is pretty weak despite that, but it is a thing. I also wonder about like writing down the pin on like a piece of tape on the back of the phone. I don't know. Um, but I don't know if that would be considered like telling them as well, but that would be a bit like even more of a gray area that I think would have benefited him. So that's a possibility. But yeah, it's
Yeah. I just wanted to say in regards to that one, like, I don't think that argument's going to fly. Like, again, not a lawyer, but that whole, like, well, he's the one that entered the pin. Yeah, but you gave him the wrong pin knowing what would happen. Like, that would be like, I know I would say this would never happen, but I've read crazier stories. If the cops raided your home and they say, we think you've kidnapped somebody, where are they? And you're like, oh, they're through that door over there, but you booby trapped that door. You're still going to be held responsible for the cop getting injured or killed because you knew there was a booby trap behind that door. And I think it's the same thing here. Like, I don't think that argument of like, well, he's the one that entered it is going to fly.
yeah. The booby trap thing was crossing my mind too. I'm glad you brought that up.
Great minds
It
think alike.
was. I remember someone saying your PIN number is protected by the First Amendment, just not your biometrics. That's generally considered to be true. That hasn't been tested in courts, but pretty much all legal experts agree it would be because it's something in your mind. That being said, there have been cases where the government just detains some people forever because they didn't give up their PIN or because they forgot their PIN, which is pretty rare, but it just goes to show some of the
I,
bad behavior in some cases.
yeah, I'm glad you highlighted that one because yeah, it's I guess it hasn't been tested in court, but generally it's your First Amendment protects. You don't have to give up the pin because that's a violation of your free speech, and I would imagine a violation of your right against self-incrimination. And we didn't mention it in these show notes, but he claims, this Samuel Tunick guy, he claims that he repeatedly asked for a lawyer and was denied. So if that's true and they can prove that, I feel like that's a really strong argument that all this stuff is going to get thrown out because a lawyer would have told him, don't give them any pin, even if it's a fake pin. I think, yeah, we
Yeah,
didn't
I
mention that,
mean,
but that is a critical component.
that was probably like the right move is to just shut up. Don't give a pin at all. Uh SB as is powering off the phone before handing it over also illegal. Powering off important to delete the encryption key. And yeah, getting your phone to like a before first unlock state is definitely more secure without wiping any of that data. That gives you more possibilities for defense in the future. You still shouldn't, give them any pin at all, like we just said. But I don't actually know how this would work. I suspect it would not be illegal in the same way at all. I mean, the government can stretch any law to make whatever claims they want, and maybe they would claim, you deleted the encryption key by powering it off, and that destroyed the evidence or whatever. Who knows, right? But I certainly don't think it would be illegal to power off your device like before you've been informed of the investigation at the very least. And I think this is something to consider like when you're going through these border checkpoints, or if you're in a situation where you reasonably expect you might have an interaction like this with some overreaching law enforcement. It's probably a good idea to just have your device powered off in the first place. It is also probably a good idea to back up your devices to like the cloud and just wipe them before you go through. Only keep minimal data on your phone for like what you need for traveling, basically. I think that that's probably one of the strongest moves you can do. So yeah, there's a lot of options that would definitely clearly be legal, much more legal compared to like the gray area um, that this case is in. But again, I think that this case is a pretty light gray. I think that their case is pretty weak. Newly Witch said, if the CSAM turns out to be fabricated, the privacy community needs to rally behind this activist. PrivSec communities mostly are speaking about it as a case, removing themselves from this being an individual to defend. And that's totally true. I think it's pretty clear that the CSAM accusations are um, illegitimate because the government is claiming that this is sort of a suspected terrorism activity in their behind the scenes emails, which is not what they told him, but that seems to be what they actually believed. So I think, in my opinion, this is just total proof that it's probably like in their training or something to just accuse people of possessing CSIM wherever they can, because it's such a, I mean, it's difficult to prove. It's something you could easily plant on people's devices. It's something that people really don't like, so it makes all of these headline stories. But since they're discussing, suspected terrorism activities behind the scenes, and not investigating him for CSAM before they told him that, I think it's very clearly a total farce, basically.
Yeah, I would imagine the CSAM thing too is like that is such a horrible thing to be charged with that most people would probably instinctively just want to clear their name right there before those accusations get out of control. Like, oh God, no, here, please take my phone. See, there's nothing on there. So
Hmm.
I wonder if that's part of why they do it too.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to go back real quick to the question about powering off your phone. I've started doing that actually because my logic is, again, I don't have anything that sensitive that I've had my phone blow up. So those of you who follow me know that. And like trying to get back into like things like Signal and all my accounts, it's like it wasn't really the end of the world, but it was still kind of a pain in the ass. So I would rather not factory reset my phone if I don't have to. So when I go through the airport, yeah, I've started just rebooting my phone right before I throw it in the thing to go through the x-ray, because I actually have had computers not like forensically searched, but I remember it was actually my Cube's computer, because it's literally from like 2012. It did go through the airport one time and they were like, hey, we pinged as like there's residue on here, I'm going to swab it with a cotton swab. It never left my site. She did everything right in front of me. She never turned it on or opened it or anything, but she like swabbed it with a cotton swab and like, okay, you came back clean, everything's good, go about your way. And so I've kind of had that walk through in my head of like, well, I don't want to delete my phone, but I also want to keep people out before first unlock. So yeah, as far as I know, that's not illegal because like Jonah was saying, like nobody came up to me and was like, hey, let me search your phone. It's me preemptively getting ahead of that. Like I am about to give up control of my phone. Let me go ahead and reboot it. And that way, if I end up in this situation where they say, hey, we pinged your phone, I'm going to take it to a back room, have fun. It's before first unlock. And also, real quick, Dag Overhaul said, have a separate innocent profile. I mean, yeah, that would work, except if they do the forensic thing, because at that point the phone's unlocked. If they just do like a quick visual search, then yeah, what are they gonna? They're not gonna find anything there. But I don't know. That's my thought process. So I just wanted to address those. Oh, the last thing I'll say real quick is to definitely go ahead and check out this 404 interview with him, because like it does require a subscription, and I mean it's like what, $5 a month, $10 a month. Just get like a 1 month subscription, but it's totally worth reading, because apparently the cops like had a hidden camera on him. They had like a tracker on his car, and he didn't know this at the time. For the record, he had no idea he was this targeted. It's so wild.
That's crazy.
Sorry.
Just another comment from Dag Overhaul. Another YouTuber says he resets his phone every time he's flying. I mean, yeah, that's not really a bad strategy. Especially if you can back it up and restore it easily at your destination. Honestly, when I fly to Vegas next week, I'll be bringing like a wiped MacBook that doesn't have any data on it. Not necessarily for this reason, mostly because I don't need to bring all of the stuff on my laptop to DEF CON, but you know, it's typically not a bad idea to travel with like the minimum information you can. So
yeah, I'm not dedicated enough to do that, but if my threat model was high enough, or if I was flying somewhere where like I knew I'm almost certainly going to get searched, like if I was going to China for whatever reason, like maybe I would do that, but it's
definitely
a lot of work,
more
for
of a
sure.
concern like international borders. I don't know like how much power TSA has in this regard, but I don't think they can do like full law enforcement investigations. I'd have to look, but border control in the U.S. definitely can. There's definitely a lot of power that border control in other countries would have as well, no matter where you're traveling. So all of those international borders, for sure, you should keep that in mind.
Yeah, agreed. I don't have anything else on that story. Do you?
I think we pretty much got it covered.
Cool.
I was just gonna look really quick if we had any comments about this story in the forum thread, since this was our kind of title story, but we may have covered a lot of the questions here that were answered by or asked by people in the live stream. And maybe Bob's your uncle said, I wonder if having an almost bare fake Android profile with a completely different pin is enough for border control. Yeah, I guess it depends on how knowledgeable they are. Like if they're only going to search one profile, you could just have that one open, but that's probably not a path I would try to go down necessarily, but it could be better than nothing. I know that you know, they can get kind of mad about like you having a blank phone. They're like, where's your social media? Is this legitimate? That sort of thing. But it's challenging to defend against the government and law enforcement agencies in this case, because they can kind of do whatever they want and it gets sorted out later by the courts. So it's not a super fantastic system, unfortunately.
Yeah, it looks like in the forum thread there was some discussion about this, but it not really a lot of questions, just people kind of talking about all the stuff we said. Somebody linked to that 404 article. Somebody else linked to a Gizmodo article. So
yeah, just there's one post in the forum I'd just highlight a sentence from. That was from Trustee Rocknate. I'm hopeful this case sets a precedent in favor of duress pins. I think that could be one of the best outcomes of this. So we'll see if that happens. I guess it depends on how tenuous the government thinks that their case will be, because there's also cases where you see like things like this, and then to avoid setting a precedent, the government will very quickly drop it. But after a lot of time, after you have to spend a lot of money, that sort of thing. So yeah, you never really know.
So real quick, wanted to mention SB here brought up the idea of a password strength checker, and somebody else also said something about using a strong password. I mean, your mileage may vary, but I remember Naomi Brockwell did a video where she argued that a 6-digit PIN is probably going to be enough for most people. I mean, again, if you're in a situation where you'd rather just wipe the phone completely, then you probably shouldn't trust a 6-digit PIN. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't. I guess what I'm getting at is like I don't think it necessarily has to be this like super crazy like 28 character randomly generated letter uppercase lowercase. Like I think there's a middle ground for most people. But I mean, certainly if you want to do that, go for it.
The thing with that is that the length of this pin does directly improve like the strength of the encryption if somebody is able to brute force that data without any limits. The reason you can do like a 6-digit pin is because of the brute forcing protections in a phone, and those are generally considered to be fairly good, especially with modern ones, like latest iPhones, or especially like the Google Pixel and the Titan chip on GrapheneOS. There should be enough rate limiting or wiping it after a certain amount of time enforced by the operating system that the complexity of your pin, as long as it's not super simple, is not going to be a huge problem. But we have seen in the past definitely a good number of cases where like we find out Celebrite or Graykey or some of these other tools that these agencies are using, they can bypass the rate limiting. So it is something definitely to consider, especially if you're going to be in the situation. The other thing you could do is have like a 6-digit pin on your profile and have a separate longer password on like a private space in your profile. Because private spaces, at least on GrapheneOS, they're fully separate profiles with their own encryption keys. You can set up a second password for them, and you could kind of like sort out most of your apps that might have sensitive information, like your banking app or your email or whatever, into a private space like that, and just keep like basic things like social media or whatever you consider less sensitive in your main profile. I think that that's one legitimate thing you can do as well. And Dag Overhaul basically said the same thing. Like if you can get the keys out of it, you can brute force the short pin super easily. So there is that to consider. But in theory, they can't get the keys out of it, and so it should be fine. But it's not as like provenly foolproof as using a longer pin. So there's trade-offs for sure, for sure.
Gotcha.
I think we kind of got it. Why don't you take our next story here?
All right. I think I'm back. I hope I'm back. I don't know what's going on with my
I
internet.
think you're back. I didn't know you left, but I can hear you now.
My internet keeps freezing up. Yeah.
Interesting.
Weird. Before we move on to the next story, we did have one question in our forum thread that's not related to this story. It said, are there any privacy alternatives to Ring cameras? I did not do any research on this one, but I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely not a fan of Ring for so many reasons, but the one thing I will give Ring is that they've got end-to-end encryption that you can enable, and I think that's a good start. But
Is it true though? I mean, Anchor had those cameras. Was it Eufy or whatever that were supposed to be end-to-end encrypted? Obviously, they were not. Ring has a lot of other privacy problems because they have those programs where like you can opt in to share all of your camera footage with law enforcement, or like other programs to search for lost dogs or something silly like that. So, yeah, it's not a great setup. There's certainly self-hosted setups you can do. There's a lot of like video recording threads on the forum you could look at with a lot of different recommended tools. There's some sort of cloud-based ones that I think are better than others, but they're going to be unsafe if they use like the internet as an authentication layer. I'm thinking of like Unify Protect, for example. They have good cameras, but there's some like reliance on like cloud authentication, kind of similar to like Plex, for example, which isn't like amazing. But there's always a trade-off between like features, because with a lot of like self-hosted ones, you don't get a lot of useful things like notifications on your phone when the doorbell rings or something like that that you would get from bigger tech company apps. But yeah, I don't have any like specific recommendations. I would take a look at all of the home camera related threads on the forum, because they are probably more knowledgeable than I am right now.
Yeah, I'm still renting, so I haven't had much of an incentive to look into home security that deeply. But I'm looking here. I know there was one that's one of our associates recommended, and I passed that along a long time ago, but I can't remember what episode that was. AI summary, so take it with a grain of salt. But according to Brave's AI summary, I looked up private doorbell camera. It says things like Reolink and Eufy are highly recommended because they allow local storage without a monthly subscription on a micro SD card. There's also a TP-Link Tapo, Aquara, who I've never heard of. And then they said there's actually some cameras that work with Home Assistant.
They're a Chinese company. I didn't know they made cameras. They make I know they make Z-Wave like sensors for Home Assistant and stuff. I wanted to bring up really quick. Sorry, I'm trying to bring up a sharing screen situation, which I don't know how do I.
I got you.
How do I share? Thanks. You can share my screen.
I have to remove mine. That's why.
Oh, there we go. Somebody in our Signal group for supporters, which you can join by donating at privacyguides.org/donate, mentioned Secluso. This is a Raspberry Pi based camera setup. It's end-to-end encrypted. The Secluso people are on our forum, I believe, and there's a thread about it. And you can even ask them questions there and stuff. I think that's definitely one to look into if you're in more of a self-hosting state of mind. There's also Frigate and Scripted, as John points out in the YouTube chat. I've used... Ooh, I don't know which one I used. I looked at both of them, and I used one of them to get some of my self-hosted cameras into Apple HomeKit, which is end-to-end encrypted and provides some of those notifications. And they integrate with Home Assistant as well. If only I remembered which one. But I think people use both of them, and that could be another some other self-hosted options to look into, especially because they work with pretty much any like LAN only cameras. Unredacted says Unify Protect is decent. Yeah, and there are ways to use Unify products without their cloud stuff. If you don't connect it to the cloud, they have like a local web interface that you can access everything on. So it's not open source. So you can maybe take that with a grain of salt, but yeah, because something to consider. John said Scripted has that functionality. I think I did use Scripted. I think that is right. So yeah, it is pretty neat. I probably wouldn't integrate it with Google and Amazon, even though it can do that, but Apple handles that all through like the Apple TV to encrypt it locally. So you do need to have like a home hub like that, but should be a bit better than those products. But again, that's not open source either. So then you have to trust Apple. There's all that stuff. If you want like a fully local self-hosted NVR, I would look at this Seclusa thing. I would look at Frigate, because I think those are all good options as well.
I just wanted to say another vote for XProtect is, again, AI summary, take it with a grain of salt. But it did say, the last thing it says, while local storage enhances privacy, note that some manufacturer data collection may still occur for device connectivity. For absolute security, consider air gap systems like XProtect or Unify setups, though these are more complex and expensive to install. So, yeah. That's all I got on that one.
Sweet. I think you're up for the next story here if you want to.
I am. All right. Let's talk about Pokemon. My childhood here. We're actually going to combine these next couple of stories because they're let me throw this up here real quick. These next couple stories are kind of all about the rise of how private companies are increasingly using surveillance technology, specifically facial recognition surveillance technology. So this one's pretty quick. This comes from PC Gamer, excuse me. And basically, it says that Nintendo stores, it says specifically in Japan. I don't know if it's worldwide, but I think it's just in Japan for now. They say that basically they're having a real problem with scalpers coming in and buying up all the cards and then reselling them. And then there's no cards left over for normal, legitimate people. So they are going to start rolling out facial recognition systems to verify that customers are only coming in once per day, which is apparently the limit. They say the exception to this will be children under elementary school age, so preschoolers up to 6 years old. Let me see here. Yeah, so this is the once a day to ensure that players get more access to the stock. If the system detects that the same person has entered the store more than one a day or received more than one entry ticket, a notification to that effect is displayed on the screen. Entry will be denied to that person based on the system's judgment. Yeah, the article kind of points out that there's really nothing you can do about this. And they did go on to they're a little more generous than I would have been. This author basically said, I've had loads of issues with the online Pokemon Center, its never-ending queues, and insistence that I'm in fact a bot whenever I try multiple times to get a pre-order through because the site keeps bugging out. While facial recognition systems seem like it would be harder to mess up, there is always room for error with these things. And unfortunately, they say that facial recognition scans for entering stores in Japan are not exactly new. Gundam stores employ the same system to ensure people only buy one exclusive item a day. It seems like it's currently the best way to combat scalpers and get popular stock out to more people. So I don't know that I agree that it's the best way, but yeah, I do appreciate them pointing out. It's like, yeah, it's a cool idea, assuming it works. And I also feel the need to point out that like these systems have to scan everybody. You know, it says like, oh, it's not going to work on children up to 6 years old. Okay, maybe it's because I'm not a parent and I don't really spend a lot of time around kids. I can't tell how old a kid is. I mean, pretty much everyone younger than me, if they're not a teenager, they're like 6. So I don't know. It's the older you get, at least again, for me, it's like, it's harder to differentiate age brackets. Like, again, I can tell it's like you're adolescent,
Oh no, did
you're a
we lose
teenager,
Nate?
you're probably a young adult. Like, but I understand that, like, did I cut out again?
Yeah, just a bit.
Um, but yeah, my point is like, you know, it's age verification is always like so bad at doing things. And I'm also annoyed by the part that it says it's based on the system's judgment. Like, I think I'd be a little more comfortable if it's like a person will intervene and double check the system, but whatever. The only other thing I'll add is it says that Pokemon does explain that this data will not be held indefinitely and will be promptly deleted after a certain period of time, but this article did not specify what that period of time is. And then the other story that we're going to group in with this one is about Madison Square Garden. And this is a summary that comes from Bruce Schneier, but I really liked his summary. I think it was really well done. So he shared a link to a story about how Madison Square Garden is using facial recognition software on everyone that enters, and they flag activists that oppose using facial recognition. They also I think when this story first started breaking, it was about a woman who worked for a law firm that was involved with suing Madison Square Garden. Like, she wasn't even involved, but she worked for the company, so they wouldn't let her in her free time to go see a Christmas thing with her kids. And it turns out that last week, the system was shut off for Taylor Swift's wedding. And they said, well, I'll read the ending here, and then I'll go back and read this quote from Evan Greer. Bruce said that whatever privacy measures Swift had in place for the wedding seemed to have worked. No photos have leaked online. So Evan Greer, who is one of the people that Madison Square Garden alerts on, says that ironically, Swift herself has reportedly used facial recognition at her own concerts to identify stalkers. This privacy for me, surveillance for thee attitude feels like a perfect encapsulation of the future we're already living in, one where wealthy elites can afford privacy while the rest of us are forced to live in a corporate surveillance panopticon. Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that, I don't think. I think, Jonah, if I can throw it back to you, how do you feel about this idea? Because, like, a private company theoretically has a right to do whatever they want, right? But, like, it feels like there's not a lot of regulation over this technology. Like, I don't know. How do you think we should navigate this?
There's really not. Looking at the chat here, Unredacted said many U.S. states and cities outlaw or restrict facial recognition without consent. First of all, at least the first story about the Pokemon Company, that's only in Japan as far as I know, so wouldn't apply here in the first place. But also, typically, you can get this consent by basically posting signs, and I would imagine that they'll do that because it's not really like, they don't have a reason to do this secretively. They probably will post signs to just say, "Hey, we're on to you, scalpers," and use that as a deterrent, basically. So I don't think that this is super regulated at all, basically, like you were saying, Nate. And yeah, there's nothing you can really do about some of these cases. It's just going to be a growing issue, I think. Especially, and this isn't like the case as far as I know with at least the Pokemon Store story, for example, but a lot of these systems will like link up with law enforcement. I know that the Madison Square Garden system does connect to law enforcement databases. The people who work at Madison Square Garden, anybody like involved in the with the business, um, they don't get information unless like a law enforcement agency comes back and like tells them, hey, we flagged this person on your cameras. But all of that data is basically streamed to some law enforcement databases, and it's all interconnected. Um, the other thing, yeah, I mean, the other thing is basically that comment where like when businesses are implementing these and they're not applying them to everyone, like they're not applying them to Taylor Swift because she demanded privacy at her wedding, for example, which I think is reasonable, obviously. But it is a situation where like the wealthy elites, as Evan Greer said, can afford privacy while the rest of us are forced to live in that corporate surveillance panopticon. Just like you said, I think that is a perfectly apt summary of the situation. I just wanted to highlight again there. It's yeah, it's just not a great situation. It really ties into the whole surveillance camera thing. We're being attacked kind of from both angles, basically. We got cities and law enforcement setting up flock cameras. We got businesses setting up all of these really advanced surveillance systems that they're not only like recording things for a limited number a period of time to like see who stole something off the shelf or something like that, but now they're like tracking people in real time, and they're like doing behavioral analysis, and they're like making these huge databases of people's data, personal information. They're linking it all up to these larger systems, and this is where it really becomes a much larger privacy concern than it was before.
I think now would actually be a good time to address. We got a question in the supporters signal chat right before we started streaming, and they said, "What can everyday people do if they want to travel without being tracked by ALPRs or other mass surveillance tools? And can the ALPRs or other cameras already in use track people outside of cars using facial recognition or other biometric identifiers?" I think we're actually about to talk about that in a minute. But like, yeah, I mean, I know there's no easy answers to that one, but like, do you think there is anything we can do as this surveillance? Because I actually earlier this year when I was in New York, I walked right past Madison Square Garden. I've actually been in that neighborhood for my previous job as well. And I remember just walking right past it, and you look around and they're not even subtle, like not even just Madison Square Garden, but NYPD, like they're not even subtle. You look at a light post and you see like, it looks like one of those stock photos. There's like 6 different cameras pointed out in every which way. And there's a sign that's like NYPD is surveilling this area or whatever. And it's like, what is happening? Other than moving out of New York and never going back? Like, what do you think there's any options here?
Yeah, it's really tough to do anything about it on like an individual level. It's really the thing that it's a thing that we have to push back against at a larger scale, I think, and we just can't find it acceptable. I think I don't know what point we will reach before we finally decide that this stuff isn't okay. I don't know what it'll take to make that happen, but yeah, it's a huge problem, and I think it's just going unnoticed and like just by the general population. And yeah, it's really hard to, you're basically fighting back against somebody with the resources of the government because it is the government, and they can really, I mean, we talk about this all the time. if the government is after you, right, there's not a lot you can do about it, and that applies even to these situations. There's probably like things you could do that would be wildly inconvenient, like map out routes that don't have these cameras, for example. But it's not realistic, I think, to avoid the the entire mass surveillance system at this time, unfortunately, because it's very, um, just very, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's invasive and it's
Pervasive.
pervasive. It's everywhere. Um, somebody in our supporters chat said wear IR blasters. Yeah, blast in with lasers. I don't know. I don't know what you can do. This is not, advice. IR blasters is probably fine. I don't know how these cameras work, so I can't tell you if that would actually work, but that would be kind of a funny setup.
I almost sent it to our production chat the other day. Since I was working on a video, we'll go into detail about this later, but I'm working on a video about Flock right now. And I checked dflock.org. I live about a block away from a major intersection. There are 13 Flock cameras just at that intersection. And thankfully, most of them, I actually don't think any of them are pointed at the road, except there is one that's pointed. It's like, oh, that's an intersection that I almost can't avoid to get on that main road to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like one camera. I'm like, man, that thing has probably caught me like so many times just going to the store, going to the gas station. Like, it's ridiculous. It's insane. And that's just in the block around my place. It's nuts.
I feel like we've seen reports of a lot of cases where some of these Flock cameras are not even pointed at roads at all, despite ostensibly being, license plate readers, but they're just being used as general surveillance cameras in general, and they do have a lot of capabilities beyond just license plate detection. I think that brings us pretty well into our next story I want to talk about here, which was just a forum post. This was a news report that was written up by Freya on our team, so it's on our website, but there were some good comments on there. From the article, Freya said, Flock Styles license plate reader vendor Leonardo announced a new system called Signal Trace, which somebody is talking about in the chat here too, so we can get into that. But it can fingerprint your wireless devices when you drive by and track you around without needing to see your license plate. When you travel in your car, your smartphone, your smartwatch, wireless headphones, and even your car's infotainment system are usually outputting a constant stream of RF emissions. When all of these individual devices are traveling together, it's likely to be the same person. So the new devices for tracking can be retrofitted onto pre-existing license plate reader cameras, and they're meant to work alongside them, storing your device fingerprint alongside your license plate number in a centralized database that police can access at any time. One of the most terrifying things about this, Freya says, is that it not only identifies your car, but it tries to identify individual people inside the car. For example, if two people are riding together, it can detect each person's individual fingerprint separately. It also means that the readers work if you're not driving. Simply walking around, biking close enough will likely mean that your unique RF fingerprint is now stored in some database and your movements can be tracked. Kind of ridiculously, Leonardo tries to advertise that their system, quote, respects individuals' privacy rights, end quote, because the actual data itself isn't decrypted or read. But as Freya points out, this is definitely an example of the metadata being more useful than the content, even if, police can't see what your actual like MAC address or other device identifier, IMEI, IMS, IMSI, what have you. Even if they can't read like the actual numbers, this system that Leonardo has built basically has already tied all of those identifiers to other things that identify you. So the content doesn't actually matter. It's still a huge privacy concern. Yeah, so again, it is really a question of like what can you do to defend yourself against this, and it's very tricky because these systems are already in place. Yeah, scarecrows in the chat says surveillance cameras respect your privacy because they can't see through your clothes or inside your bags. That's exactly the same sort of argument, right? If you're tracking all of this metadata, you're tracking people exactly where they are, what they're doing. It's not a privacy respecting situation just because you can't like later look up what exact like device identifier was being tracked at that time. It's it's a huge privacy problem. It's completely ridiculous that they would claim otherwise. Scarecrows also said that it looked like the Texas Department of Transportation has antennas on all their camera poles now, so they're probably adding that in. They haven't seen anything officially saying they're Leonardo signal trace, but they look the same. So very, very concerning stuff. And I don't know like how prevalent Leonardo is compared to Flock, but I'd be concerned about that. I also wouldn't be surprised if Flock if they don't have a product like this already is working on something like this because as terracotta pie in the chat said, why the world is just becoming so surveilling and intrusive. That's so true, and a huge it's a huge problem.
I mean, that means we fix crime, right? Like, there's no place in the world right now that an ant can't pass gas that it's not caught on some kind of camera. So clearly we've solved crime.
Yeah, we've solved it. Nobody has ever done anything bad since we added these systems, so I guess it's totally worth it.
Yeah, I think I know it's kind of a rhetorical question, but I think things like this go. I think I know this comes from Calyx OX or Calyx OS, and we Henry and I talked about it at Surveillance Report, but I feel like they really have the best model in the sense that like privacy is a three-pronged approach. There's the technical side, the legislative side, and the education side. And we've talked about this before, like the people who just think like, oh, well, I'll just use Linux and like all this age verification stuff won't affect me. Yeah, until the person you're messaging is using Windows and all your stuff is getting scraped up in Windows recall and all that kind of crap. And then, or until like Canada bans encrypted messaging and Signal says we're not going to service that place anymore. Like, what are you going to do then? And but at the same time, it's like, yeah, obviously companies break the law. We can't just solely rely on these laughably low fines. And I think this is a case of like the education one where like people don't understand. And I think a lot of it is a lack of, I don't want to sound mean when I say this, but like a lack of empathy in the sense of like what was her name? Shoshana Zuboff in Surveillance Capitalism, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She tells a story at the very beginning how her house like literally exploded, like it burned down and exploded. And she talked about like when the house first caught fire, she was like trying to gather up all her notes and stuff because she had no frame of reference for like what was about to happen. Like, it's just one of those things where like when you don't have a frame of reference, you don't even think about it. It's the whole, sorry, I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm going somewhere with this. It's the whole, like, when people think like, oh, well, why would anyone want to hack me? Like, I'm not interesting, or like, I have nothing to hide. It's like, yeah, because you're a decent person whose brain doesn't immediately think of all the horrible things you could do with somebody's data. And I think it's the same thing here where like normal, not crazy people think about surveillance cameras and they're like, oh yeah, we can find like stolen cars and Amber Alerts and like deter crime. And like, yeah, this is great. And because they're not completely insane, they don't stop and think about the cops we talked about a couple weeks ago who are like stalking not even their girlfriend, a girl who turned them down. All the hacked cameras that allow pedophiles to look at playgrounds. I think we covered one story about a camera that was, or maybe I wrote about it in like a data breach or something, but like flock cameras that were like placed inside a gym at a community center. And rightfully people were like, why was there even a camera in there in the first place? Like, normal people don't think about all the bad things that can happen because they're not bad people. And yeah, I think that's really what it is it's a lack of education where people don't. And furthermore, it's this is one of the reasons I post the data breach thing every week is because it's one thing to say this could happen. It's another thing to show articles and go like, this does happen all the time. Here's the 20 pages of search results of all the times this has happened. And I think that's when it'll really start, not to try and scare people because that doesn't work, but to just make people realize like, this is not hypothetical. This is not theoretical. This is happening. And we have to factor that into the math. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Tip your service.
Scarecrow's in the chat here. About those cameras, you should post a picture of these if you can to the forum. Have people take a look at them because I think we can try and track them down. Yeah, it is. I mean, of course, these are gonna go brandless at this point because they don't want to get any backlash, of course. But yeah, it's a huge problem. Post it on the forum. Discuss.privacyguides.net. It's a great place.
Yeah, tag me in that because I'm on the board of EFF Austin, and I think I know what you're talking about, but it's been so long. I no longer live in Texas, and even at the time, I never really like stopped and stood on the street corner and like, let me get a good look at this. But yeah, if tag me because I can share it around with the other board members, and maybe we can identify what those are and figure something out. Or maybe somebody already knows. For all I know,
Yeah.
I've never asked about them before. So. Okay. Oh, the one last thing I wanted to share on this topic is somebody left a comment on this story, which is why I included it as a forum post and not an actual story, where they said the part about this Leonardo thing can track RFID devices such as credit cards. They said, I cast suspicion on this claim, even if we pretend they aren't trying to scan RFID through the metal panels of your car, which should normally neutralize RFID. I have no idea how they could even pretend to scan a passive RFID signal, such as that of a credit card, from several meters away. Its range is a few centimeters. The signal to noise ratio is going to render the signal as unreadable noise at any larger range. They make a really good point because I do use Apple Pay sometimes, and like depending on the terminal, sometimes like if I'm just a few centimeters or inches off, it won't read the and I know that's like NFC, not RFID, but yeah, these things are so low powered. It's like, how are you going to read that from 10 feet away? That doesn't even make sense. So big if true. If they've mastered that technology, that's impressive. Alrighty. I think that'll bring us into the site updates if we don't have anything more to add to that.
All right.
So yeah, in a little bit, we're going to give you guys an update on a story about some eBay executives. If any of you remember that story, they threatened and harassed some people who left some negative reviews. And we're not just talking about like legal letters. But before we get to that, we're going to give you some quick updates about what we've been working on at Privacy Guides this week. So I mentioned I've did some work on a flock video. That's because our video about Bull Run and the NSA's it's not the latest attack on encryption, but the next chapter in our series is done. It looks great. Thank you to Jordan for all of that. And it should be going out to members. I think we're trying to release it this weekend. So if you are not a member, definitely sign up, get early access to that. This is my first time filming a storytelling video like that, and I'm really excited with how it turned out. And I think you guys are going to enjoy it. And then, yeah, just a little teaser. Our next video that we're already working on is about Flock and DFlock's National Day of Action. And I believe it was Jonah that did some digging and realized, like, man, other than Ben Jordan, there's not really a lot of privacy people talking about Flock. And so we thought it would be really cool for us to step in. And hopefully this will be a really good video that explains what Flock is, explains what are all the problems with it, gives that list of 20 pages of search results that I mentioned earlier, and is hopefully something you guys can share with friends and family to be like, hey, go talk to your city councilors, email your politicians, and tell them you don't want this. So that's what we've got going on the video side.
Sweet. On the website, community side of things, some stuff I'm working on. There's an upcoming kind of redesign of the site to make it a bit easier to maintain. We were using this software called MakeDocs, MKDocs, which is basically being discontinued. There's I don't know, a lot going on with it. So we're working on kind of a new, that's kind of the driving force behind this. So we're should be switching to Hugo for that, which should make contributing a little easier, hopefully. And we're gonna redesign our blog, make it a bit easier to navigate. Besides that, I've been looking into security keys lately. That's been mostly what I've been doing this week. There's a lot of stuff like going on that makes them really annoying to like come up with good recommendations and criteria. A lot of cases where like security keys aren't certified, or they are certified but they don't report themselves as certified in some cases, so then websites can't tell if they are or not, and stuff like that. There's varying varying security practices with all of these, and it's hard to find like one super great solution because, of course, YubiKeys have been traditionally like the top recommendation, but there are drawbacks to them for sure. You can't back them up, which people find very inconvenient. If you switch them out or update, you have to switch them out on every single website you visit, which is really annoying to do. So, yeah, a lot of stuff like that. So continuing to look into those pretty much. There's a thread on our forum at discuss.privacyguides.net again, talking about there's like multiple threads basically. There's some tool specific ones, there's comparison ones where people are sharing kind of opinions about all of that stuff. So if you have any thoughts about security keys for some reason, you can chime in there. Otherwise, Free has been working on articles. We talked about that one earlier, but there's been other ones throughout the week. They get posted to privacyguides.org/news, and it's a great way to stay up to date with some other stories that we don't talk about on this weekly show. Some of the stories include over 100 vulnerabilities being found in the IRS's contractor handling Americans' tax information. New dynamic patching in Chrome is going to allow updates without restarting the browser. And then, of course, those stories that we talked about today. All of the stuff that we just talked about in this section, it's made possible by our supporters. You can sign up for a membership or donate at privacyguides.org/donate, or you can pick up some swag merch at shop.privacyguides.org. Hopefully, I can expand some of that stuff with new sticker designs in the future, but we'll see. Privacy Guides, all of us here, of course, we are a nonprofit. We research and share privacy related information. We host communities like our forum, for example. We have chats on Matrix where people can get advice and stay up to date about digital privacy and preserving your digital rights. So yeah, with all of that out of the way, we're going to talk about an update to the FCC router ban that we discussed a few episodes ago. I don't remember exactly when that was. First, I'll check the chat really quick for some stuff. Derek 2358, looking forward to the vlog video. Yeah, I hope it'll be good. Nate's been working on that for a bit, so hopefully we can get that out pretty soon. Tony Mojo said the same thing. Yeah, I think it should be fun.
It's definitely a little bit more entry level. It doesn't dive in super deep, but again, there's so little content out there as it is that I think we kind of wanted to start very surface level and give people kind of an on ramp to understand the problem. At least that's what I was going for. So
yeah.
I also just wanted to say real quick, the security keys do have drawbacks. Like right now, I'm trying to get back into using the Tor browser a lot more, and it's like, oh cool, I can't even log into Tuda because I added the security key and removed TOTP. So
yeah, that is a bummer. I hope Tor can figure that out at some point. I don't remember if Mulvet browser has enabled it. I know they were looking into it at one point, but
I was gonna say they haven't yet, but I know they're trying to. So hopefully soon. Fingers crossed.
This story was reported by Ars Technica. The Trump administration exempts SpaceX's Starlink from the FCC ban on foreign-made routers. A public notice issued by the FCC said Starlink routers received approval from the Department of Defense. SpaceX's exemption is good until February 1st, 2028. Netgear's exemption, which we're going to talk about next, is only good until October of 2027. Netgear was the first major vendor to get an exception to this rule on April 14th. Amazon then received an exemption for its Aero routers and the routers to be used for its LEO satellite service. I would remind people, we talked about this in the episode where we first discussed this FCC router ban, but like there are pretty much no routers made in America, and it's not like super easy to just spin up router factories overnight. So of course, there would have to be all sorts of exemptions to these laws. I do think, and we'll get back to this in a second, but I do think it's kind of arbitrary how these are being applied. The article says SpaceX has a factory in Texas, and some of its routers have the words "Made in the USA" printed on them, leading some to believe that it might be the only major router maker to escape the FCC's wide-ranging ban. Yeah, exactly. But other Starlink routers are made in Vietnam. So some discussion topics here. The FCC hasn't publicly shared what criteria these companies meet to get exemptions. And this is the main problem that I have with all of this stuff. It seems to be kind of arbitrary whoever's in the Trump administration's favor at any given point in time. It seems like they are often kind of coerced or threatened into like making whatever changes the government wants in order to preserve their business. I am really annoyed right now, not because of routers, but because of some stuff that's happening with the company that makes my car. I have a Polestar 2, and they've been banned from selling new models in the US because they're a Chinese company. It's a strange situation because like their sister company Volvo is owned by the same parent company and they received an exemption. It seems like other car manufacturers are receiving exemptions as well, but that kind of relates to a similar thing as these routers where it's computers from foreign countries that the Trump administration doesn't want in the USA. It's very strange because all of the computers in Polestar's cars, as well as Volvo's, run Android Automotive. So like it's all designed by a American company basically. So why they are concerned about those computers, it's not very clear to me. But it's just it kind of seems to be whoever is putting in the effort to basically convince the Trump administration that they should keep their business around is getting exemptions. And in that case, Polestar just didn't really bother with it. But it's annoying that all that stuff is happening in the first place. Anyways, I think that was my main thought. Nate, what were you thinking about this article? Did you have any thoughts or questions about it?
Not really too much. I mean, you kind of nailed everything. You know, it's like even from the beginning, the government hasn't really said like what exactly is their criteria here, what is the threat they're trying to defend against. Just some vague national security, which, you know, the government's always done like, oh, national security, but now they're like really kicking that into overdrive. And I think it's the article also noted that it's interesting that these are all temporary exemptions, but once they're up, it's like, okay, what happens? Like, can they just like they can reapply, but I guess they're also supposed to show progress that they're moving manufacturing to the US, which, like you said, just does not happen overnight. So, okay, this is an extreme example, but I checked on it the other day out of sheer boredom. Samsung semiconductor factory that they're building in Texas, that sucker's been under construction. I think they broke ground in like 2021 or something like that. And every year they've been saying, we're going to start putting out chips in the spring. We're going to start putting out chips in the fall. They're still not putting out chips. I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
scheme,
happening,
but
I think, with a lot of these companies in America. There's one in Arizona I know of. I don't remember if it's TSMC or Intel, but somebody's building like a
I
plant
think
out
it's
there, and that is,
TSMC.
yeah, and that's been like a similar situation where it's routers might be an easier one to make in the US. I know that they really want chip companies to move manufacturing to the US, but like that is such a specialized tool that like even TSMC is gonna have a very hard time moving that manufacturing capacity to the US if they want to, because it's not just a matter of like getting the plans in the machines and like making it here. Some of these products require like real experts in the field, and like pretty much all of them in that case are in Taiwan. So where are they in America who can even do this stuff? You actually need the people involved in it. Actually just is true that there aren't enough people in America who know about that stuff to implement these things. So I think that that's going to cause delays. I think it's just the thing where like clearly favors Elon Musk, basically. That's kind of the favoritism we've seen with Tesla and his other companies. We've seen it with like OpenAI and Sam Altman. There's just some companies that the government really likes. I think we talked about that when Anthropic's Fable models were banned by the US government for some period of time. And that was an American company. You know, there weren't even like Chinese concerns, which is usually the excuse that they use. So yeah, I don't think anyone's really safe from these sorts of restrictions, unfortunately.
Yeah, honestly, I was surprised it took Starlink this long to get the exception. I wonder if they just didn't bother to apply for it or something. But yeah,
Um,
it's like you said, there's so many like with these I mean, I don't know about routers, but with semiconductor factories, it's like in some cases, there's like very specific niche equipment that's made by like, I'm not even making this up. There's some stuff that's only made by like a single company in Germany that has like 10 people. So they're back
Mhm.
ordered by like 6 to 18 months on this equipment. And then that's not including the facility itself, which granted the Samsung semiconductors conductor factory is like one of the biggest in the world. So that's probably a bit of an exception. But yeah, it's not like you just rent an office space, throw in a few cubicles and start printing out stuff. Like even with these routers, it's like this doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's
And it's
wild.
going to be, it's kind of a situation. I think a lot of these businesses who are affected are going to have to face the question of like, is it even worth sticking around in the US? And I think probably more businesses may opt out of that than the Trump administration probably expects. Going back to the whole Polestar thing, I know that like it's only 5% of their US sales or something like that were in the US. They're big in like Europe, for example. And in I assume the reason that they didn't really pursue an exemption in that case was because it'd be way cheaper to just drop that 5% of sales than, try and meet all of these demands that the government has. And I don't know if that'll be the case with like Netgear, for example, but spinning up this manufacturing capability is not cheap. So giving up on US sales for a lot of these companies might actually be the more cost-effective way to go, even for American companies. Like Netgear's an American company, for example. They just manufacture overseas like pretty much every other company in the US does. So it'll be a weird time in tech. I think it'll be bad for Americans overall because Americans have gotten really used to tech being very cheap. If you ask anybody from any other country, even like nearby countries like Canada, but especially Europe, especially like far away from everything, countries like Australia, um, tech is like really like it's way more expensive to buy pretty much everything in those countries compared to the US. And I think that changes like this are just going to really push up the price to like not exorbitant, but basically it's going to be meeting the prices of all these other countries, and we're just kind of going to be in the same boat. We're just not going to have the advantages that we've enjoyed for quite a while, and that'll be probably a shock to a lot of people.
I don't have much more to add to that. I agree. Tough times are coming.
Yeah. Well, why don't you take us away with our next question? Speaking of Europe.
Yeah, speaking of Europe, and tough times are coming. So this next story comes from Telegraph. It says, inside the dystopian world of Germany's free speech crackdown. I'm going to read off the notes that I made here because this is a very long article. Definitely worth a read. Lots of good stuff in there, but I'm going to read off my notes just to keep it to the relevant parts. So Berlin police told Dr. Ziedelman he had been accused of violating a post-Second World War law that bans the display of Nazi symbols, slogans, and imagery, and could now face 3 years in prison if found guilty. The 69-year-old found out the offending social media post was a meme about Adolf Hitler, but it was one in which he criticized the Nazi dictator and compared his invasion of Czechoslovakia to Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So basically, like I'm saying Hitler is bad. Why is this? Yeah. Dr. Z is one of thousands of Germans who have been threatened with fines or prison sentences for social media posts that fall afoul of the country's political speech laws, which are unusually stringent for an EU member state. One German had his home raided for calling a minister a Schwachkopf, which I guess is German for dummy, and I'm sure all the Germans are laughing at my pronunciation right now. Another was fined 2,000 euros, or about 1,700 pounds, for calling Friedrich Merz a lying Fritz under a law that critics claim makes it effectively illegal to make fun of politicians. The number of investigations under Section 86A, the Nazi symbol ban that Dr. Z was investigated for, has more than doubled over the past decade, according to official police statistics. Investigations into the political insult law also reached a record level in 2025. The surge in cases is so vast that the UN has launched an investigation into free speech violations in Germany, a step typically reserved for dictatorships and banana republics. German free speech activists on the left and right, as well as the Trump administration, have also raised the alarm, and there are growing calls from some of the country's stricter laws to be scrapped. I'm going to pronounce this wrong. The furor bears some similarities to the speech debate in Britain, where citizens have a knock on the door from police over opinions posted online. This part blew my mind. In the case of Dr. Z, the rise of online portals in Germany, which allow citizens to report each other for illegal comments, seems to be what alerted police to his social media post. So they literally have like Stasi style snitch on your neighbor because something he said hurt my feelings, which is pretty insane. Another controversial law in Germany's free speech debate is Section 188 of the Criminal Code, which imposes a de facto ban on publicly insulting or defaming elected officials. In one recent case, a pensioner was investigated under Section 188 for posting "Pinocchio is coming" on Facebook after he learned that Friedrich Merz, the chancellor, was visiting his hometown. In November 2024, police in Bavaria raided the home of another pensioner because he called Robert Habeck, the then vice chancellor of Germany, again, a dummy. The raid was reportedly launched after Mr. Habeck personally filed a criminal complaint against the pensioner. In 2021, police raided a man's apartment in Hamburg after he told a senator, "You're such a D." I'm assuming it's dick. I don't know. And this year, a resident was fined 2,000 euros for calling Mr. Merz a lying Fritz. Officials show a record 4,792 Section 188 cases were filed in Germany in 2025, with the numbers rising by nearly 85% between 2023 and 2025. So, yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to the store or the thing that I said with the graphene thing, where it's like some people are totally comfortable painting a target on their back because it's the principle of the matter, right? Like, you should be allowed to call your politicians names. I'm sorry, but no matter what politician it is, as long as you're not like threatening them, you should be allowed to say that they're stupid. You should be allowed to say that they're corrupt. You should be allowed to say that they're not doing a good job. Like, you should be allowed to criticize them. And I think it's one of those things where like we're seeing this all over the West, unfortunately, where this kind of stuff is being monitored. We know that the feds here in the US, at least, are monitoring social media. That's what services like Palantir do, is they just scrape social media, even the really fringe niche ones that only have like 100,000 people using them. So just remember that what you post, even if it's like friends only or something, anything you put in a digital format, you should kind of assume it's public. And just be aware. If you're one of those people who's like, I'm going to go ahead and stand up for my right for free speech, like, that's totally cool. I applaud that. I do that too. I'm very critical of all levels of government on Mastodon, but at the same time, just you need to be aware of the risk you're taking. So, and Germany needs to figure out what they're doing if they're getting investigated by the UN. I think that's pretty wild. I don't know if I have much more to add to that. Did anything jump out at you that I missed?
No, I don't think so. I think you pretty much covered it. Yeah, it's just like we talked about earlier in terms of like government overreach, basically. Are you willing to take the risk of being targeted by these governments, even if you're not like doing anything wrong? It's a pain, it's a hassle that they can really put you through, and I think that that's a big problem we have to face right now.
Good times. I have not heard of this Gulag archipelago that Scarecrow recommends, so I don't know. I can add that to my reading list. I haven't heard of that one before. Sounds like something that somebody in Russia may have written. I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so I think we can probably jump into our story about eBay that I know you were interested in.
Yeah, that's a crazy one. Yeah, I was just checking the chat here, but we'll look at this TechCrunch article. eBay reaches a $56 million settlement with e-commerce newsletter writers it terrorized in 2019. I remember reading about this in 2019. Well, I guess I didn't remember I read it in 2019, though. I thought it was an older story. It's a lot more recent than I thought. The article says the settlement this week resolves a 2021 civil case that was brought by the couple against eBay. The couple is a married couple, Ina and David Steiner, who were the co-authors of E-commerce Bytes. They inspired the ire of high-level eBay executives, said TechCrunch, after occasionally criticizing the company in their newsletter. Executives from eBay used sock puppet social media accounts to harass the couple, while also sending them anonymous, threatening letters and bizarre items in the mail, including live spiders and cockroaches, pornographic magazines, a bloody pig mask, a funeral wreath, and a book about surviving the death of a spouse. So this is not just the typical legal harassment you might see from a company's lawyers. This is like actual criminal harassment and stalking from top level executives at eBay. According to previously released court documents, a plan that was attempted but never successfully carried out involved affixing a GPS tracking device to the couple's car. Yet another internally broached plan at eBay involved sending a quote Samoan gang to the Steiners' home. In a statement published Tuesday, eBay disavowed its former employees' behavior as, quote, not representative of eBay's culture. So that is a crazy story. I know that eBay made that statement, obviously, but people up to the CEO of eBay, Devin Weinig, and multiple board members were involved in this. The CEO settled for $2 million as part of this settlement, was directly from him. $500,000 will be paid out from another eBay executive, Wendy Jones, and 7 former eBay employees were criminally charged and pled guilty in relation to this plot, including the company's former security chief, James Bao, who was sentenced to nearly 5 years in prison for this. So it's wild. eBay is crazy, apparently, and I believe a lot of the people um a lot of the people involved are still on the at least the board, I believe. I know that the CEO is the former CEO. I don't know who's involved now, but not all of them were like very punished, basically. So I guess getting $56 million is not the worst outcome for these people. They're probably happy about that because they settled, but it is absolutely crazy that they had to go through that in the first place. A targeted harassment campaign like that is not exactly typical of a company like eBay. So yeah, was there anything you wanted to discuss about this article or any other thoughts that you had, Nate?
No, I just I think partially I wanted to cover it because one, like, yeah, it's so wild. It's like these are executives. Like these, and it's funny because I've noticed I've worked around every level of employee you can imagine, from like the entry level cashier at the grocery store to like I have stood 10 feet away from someone who's in the top 20 on the Forbes billionaire list. Like I have worked around everybody you can imagine. And I've noticed a curve of like, I don't want to drop an F-bomb, of like how many craps they give, where like the lowest level people don't care. Like they're never stressed. They don't care. Well, I mean, they're stressed, but like they don't care because they don't get paid enough to care. And then on the other end of the spectrum is like all the higher executives that don't care because they pay someone else to care. And then right in the middle are all like the middle managers that are just constantly stressed and high strung about everything. And so it's just weird to me that there's like all these C suites and executives that it's just like, why are you wasting your time because somebody like left you a negative review
Yeah.
in their personal Substack? Like seriously, grow up,
Truly,
dude.
like when we were talking about this article earlier today, if you had asked me about this story, because I knew of this story. I remember reading the original like story about it, but I would have told you I remember this happening in like 2008 or 2010 or like sometime like early eBay basically, where maybe it's a small company and they're like personally invested, but this started in early 2019, this whole thing. Like eBay is a massive company at this point, and you're concerned about some couple's newsletter on a blog online. It doesn't even make any sense at all. It is the wildest story I have ever seen. And yeah, I guess I don't I don't even know what else to say about that. It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. Also, just privacy. Be careful what information you put out there, who has access to it, all that kind of
Yeah,
fun
you
stuff.
never know who's gonna stalk you, apparently.
Seriously, that's so wild. You would think they'd have better things to do. I sure would if I was being paid that much. Just to backtrack, Scarecrow was talking about that book. He said, yeah, it's about someone's arrest in 1945 for private letters to a friend about Stalin. Imagine your letters from 7 years ago came back to smack you in this way. 8 years of hard labor. Yeah, I kind of want to point that out, that not to fearmonger, but this is something I hear smart people point out all the time, is like, again, why privacy matters is a lot of the time in an authoritarian or repressive regime, when the new guys take over, they will retroactively punish people for things that happened before. So in a functioning democracy, usually a law will be passed and they'll say, okay, from this point going forward, this thing is illegal. But like when the Taliban took over, I distinctly remember this story because I remember thinking how sad it was. When the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, when the US pulled out, Afghans were rushing to like delete their online presence because for years, a lot of them had been like kind of slowly westernizing. And now they knew that some of the stuff they did that was like totally innocent, like, maybe women wearing blue jeans, could get them killed now. And they were trying so hard to scrub their social media presence and stuff like that because now what they did in the past is, yeah. And like, I don't think we should all be living in fear, but it's just, again, be mindful of yeah. Privacy matters. It's very unfortunate. But yeah, that's all I had, I think. So, I think those were all our stories. So I think we can check around, see if we have any more final questions before we wrap up here. I think we
Yeah,
only had
send them in
one
the
forum post this
send them
week.
in the chat if you have any. I did see a forum post I wanted to look at actually. One of the
Sure.
top stories from the last week. Somebody posted on the forum, does your privacy setup actually make you stand out more? They said for the past month and a half, they've been trying out some VPN services on their phone, trying to see which one works better. So they talked about different VPN providers that they used. But they said that they received a message from their IT department basically saying they detected a connection to their work email account from an IP address associated with Mulvad VPN, and they wanted to confirm that it was them and why they were using a VPN service for that connection, which of course did not make them feel very private. Um, it is so like it is a concern with some of these tools, absolutely. We talk about this a lot more in like the browser fingerprinting context, where it's like using something like Mulvad browser, for example, or even Brave might make you more fingerprintable to people who are specifically looking out for it. A lot of these privacy tools that we recommend are really geared towards thwarting like mass surveillance tools. They're effective at blocking like 99% of the general things that you'll see on sites, whether that's like Facebook tracking or ad networks or that sort of broad surveillance, whether that's by companies or otherwise. When it comes to like individualized privacy advice, it is more of a you have to, I mean, there's a lot of like threat modeling you have to take into account. You have to decide who you're trying to defend against from a privacy perspective, um, and how you want to stand out. Because, like, if people are looking at you specifically, they can detect that you're using these privacy tools, and um, that can be a red flag in some cases, like this one, for example. There are certainly ways to work around this. Um, One way, like on phones, at least Android phones, for example, I see people use private spaces or work profiles in their main profile because you can set a VPN connection for only that profile and the apps inside that, and then you could have like a private space with a VPN for most of your general apps, and then keep like work stuff or local stuff like your bank in a profile that doesn't use a VPN. Um, But yeah, it really depends on your individual situation in that case, which is why if you have any questions about that sort of thing, it'd be great to ask on the forum. There were a lot of good responses in that thread. I won't go through all of them, but that was kind of my 2 cents in that, and I wanted to to highlight. I think a related question here in the chat from, and maybe Bob's your uncle. If you obfuscate a connection to a VPN like you can with Tor bridges, does the ISP still know you're connecting to a VPN? That is the sort of thing where it's also suspicious, or it can be. There are different obfuscation methods that are less fingerprintable. So, like web tunnels with Tor, for example, are supposed to be less identifiable, which is why they can get around censorship in some countries. I don't know what specific tools you would use with a VPN, although some of that Tor bridge software is kind of generic and could be used in theory for that sort of thing. But even in that case, I think it's a little suspicious if you're just sending like a large amount of traffic every day to one specific IP address, and there aren't a ton of ways around that. So I guess I don't know off the top of my head if there's any like VPN clients that will rotate different connections between different IPs or VPNs or whatever. I'd have to look into that. But I think either way, typically your ISP definitely can detect whether you're using a VPN. They can also detect whether you're using Tor. The Tor network, maybe that's a common misconception people have, but it doesn't hide the fact that you're using these things or like your devices or whatever from the ISP specifically. The only thing that it will hide is a lot of metadata about that traffic, like the domain names you're connecting to and IP addresses, etc. How much you're sending to like one particular source. But that's why we say VPNs are they're not like a foolproof solution. They're just shifting trust from your ISP to that VPN provider in most cases, but they're not like the perfect privacy tools, and they can be detected. So it is something that you have to keep in mind.
Yep. I don't really have anything to add to that. I did see that question. I thought it was really interesting because, yeah, I thought about, like you said, we usually see it talked about in the browser space where if, everybody's using Mulvad browser and you've got all the shields and uBlock turned on, then you stand out. So, but it's definitely a lot different when you're talking about very specific use cases like at work, or they talked here about like trying to access their bank and stuff like that. So it's a good thread though. Lots of good info there.
I'll check our Signal donors chat again real quick here.
Yeah, I've been kind of bouncing around, checking the forum thread. Not seeing anything new.
Scarecrows in the chat said Zuma. I'm not familiar with who that is, but they made a video about the government banning VPNs. Maybe that's worth checking out. I'll have to add it to my list of videos. I assume there probably are ways of like obfuscating some of that information, but typically with VPN companies also, like the IP address that you're connecting to is visible and known to be a VPN, so like they can just know that way. A lot of the deep packet inspection stuff that I've seen is like claims that your ISP could use that to detect what specific sites that you're connecting to, even when you're using a VPN. And people say the same thing about the Tor network, that they can use that to see, to kind of gain more information about what you're doing on Tor, in addition to just the fact that you're connecting to it. I haven't seen any evidence that that can be reliably applied in the real world. I know that like it's all just theoretical, and I think that like some VPN providers like Mulvad with their DAITA program, like they like claim to defend against that sort of thing, but also I've never seen any proof that that sort of thing can be reliably used outside of like lab academic settings, basically with small groups. At an ISP scale, I don't think that deep packet inspection is going to be a huge issue, but there are, if you are concerned about that, there are of course obfuscation techniques. as unredacted said, there's also advanced protocols like X-ray reality. That's sort of a similar thing. Spoof the TLS signatures of other sites. I'm not totally for sure with how that works. I think similar to web tunnels, if I remember correctly, that Tor has, but I could be wrong. I know a lot of these tools, especially ones that unredacted.org works with. You should definitely check out their site, by the way, because they're doing a lot of cool stuff with like the Tor network and stuff. But a lot of those for like anti-censorship purposes can get around that sort of thing. I will have to look more into how this works because I'm not sure. I feel like, like I said before, I think sending a lot of traffic to like one specific server is probably suspicious in itself. But yeah, some of these tools can add more plausible deniability. But maybe there's other things that it does that I don't know or remember off the top of my head. So I'll have to look into that later.
I wanted to mention Scarecrow said here that several politicians have suggested that this sort of stuff may earn you extra scrutiny. I remember we covered that story a little bit, and I think what they were actually saying was that it's not so much that using a VPN will make you extra interesting. It's more that so the way that Section 702 works is any electronic signal that crosses international borders becomes fair game for the NSA.
Yeah.
And with a VPN, since they can't, in theory, since they can't tell where it's coming from originally, there's a lot of questions about like, does that count as crossing international borders? Can you collect VPN traffic? Because is it somebody from the UK connecting here to try and evade age verification on Discord? Is it somebody from a repressive country? Is it somebody in the US who's just connected to a nearby server and it didn't cross international lines or something like that? So, or if you use like Proton Secure Core, those route through servers that are actually owned by Proton. So there's a handful in Iceland, there's a handful in Switzerland. I think there's another country that they have a few. But so like those would, for a US user like myself, those would bounce out of the country and then back in. So I think that's more what it was referring to. Not so much like, hey, let's watch everybody that uses a VPN, but more like, hey, how do we know if these people are supposed to be protected by law? Which I would argue the NSA doesn't care about anyways, but I digress. So.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. I was trying to get something to go.
I was just going to say, Zach from Unredacted also said they take into account how much traffic is sent to different IPs. I guess there's some VPN clients designed for censored countries that can load balance connections. Yeah, that would be what I'm interested in looking into more, because I think that could be a cool solution. But I don't know what they are. Again, I'll have to look into this after the show.
Yep, I don't think I have much else. I'm not seeing anything in the Signal chat.
Kind of wraps things up. I think I just want to share really quick. Right before this stream, I was reading a story and I saw I caught some of Henry from Tech Lore's live stream like an hour before this one, where he talked about some stuff about Texas getting a court order for VeriSign to basically revoke another country's .com domain. I had a lot of thoughts both about that story and also about Henry's take on the whole thing. So I think I'm gonna talk about that in a live stream on my channel right after this one. So if anyone's interested in continuing to listen to me talk about stuff, you could go over there if you want to, but just throwing that out there. Otherwise, yeah, Nate, you want to wrap things up, do you think?
Yeah, sure. I'll let you get to that. So all the updates from This Week in Privacy will be shared on the blog every week. So sign up for the newsletter or subscribe with your favorite RSS reader if you want to stay tuned. For people who prefer audio, we also offer a podcast available on all podcast platforms and RSS, and this video will be synced to PeerTube. Privacy Guides is an impartial nonprofit organization that is focused on building a strong privacy advocacy community and delivering the best digital privacy and consumer technology rights advice on the internet. If you want to support our mission, you can make a donation on our website, privacyguides.org. To make a donation, you can click the red heart icon located in the top right corner of the page. You could also go straight to privacyguides.org/donate. You can contribute using standard fiat currency via debit or credit card, or opt to donate anonymously using Monero or your favorite cryptocurrency. Becoming a paid member unlocks exclusive perks like early access to video content and priority during the live stream Q&A. You'll also get a cool badge on your profile in the Privacy Guides forum and the warm, fuzzy feeling of supporting independent media. So thank you, everyone who watched and stuck around, and we will see you next week.
Yep.